Welcome back, everyone. So let's pull down Firebase into our application. The first thing that I want you to think about is the fact that we are going to be interacting with this new API. The API in this particular case is going to be Firebase. Now, Firebase has a very particular way of doing things. So what we want to do is think about how we can abstract out this as best as we can. And generally speaking, the easiest way you can do this is try and keep anything that you write when it comes to interfacing with some kind of backend API that might have some particular nuances to it inside of its own folder and inside of its own file in that folder. So in this particular case, what I might do is inside of source, I want to make a new folder and I'm going to call it utils. This is going to contain utility files. And the one that I want to make is a Firebase utility file. So I'm going to make a Firebase folder, and inside of Firebase, I'm going to make firebase.utils.js. So here, this is just JavaScript. We're most likely not going to return any JSX from this because this library is just for using Firebase. I'm going to link you the docs to Firebase as we do this so that you can follow along, but I'm not going to lie to you, Firebase documentation is kind of hard to read. It's very technical as per all of Google's documentation. I actually find Google to write a little bit of confusing documentation sometimes, very thorough, but sometimes a little bit hard to get started with. But essentially what we're going to do is inside of this utility folder, set up everything we need to get started. So in order for you to use Firebase, you actually need to import from Firebase and then / what it is that you want to pull in. So Firebase, as I mentioned, is a suite of tools. Firestore is one of the tools inside. So this suite, though, you bring down from the library as a thing called the app. So this kind of captures all of the things required to get Firebase running, including if it's internal services. So in order for you to get it, you need the initialize app function. This initialize app function creates an app instance for you based off of some type of config, which we'll talk about right now. This config is an object that allows us to attach this Firebase app instance to that instance that we have online. Because right now we have the library installed, but there's no way of us telling Firebase, oh, this instance that you're using should be referring to the one that you have created inside of Firebase console. Specifically this one right here. So how do we do this? Well, what you want to do is inside of the home page, you want to click this little part here that says web, because there's different ways that you can add your application to Firebase. So Firebase needs you to confirm how to do it. Now, what we want to register is a web app. So I'm just going to call this Crown Clothing Web App because that's what we're building. It's our React web app. We don't want to do hosting yet. It doesn't even matter. But here now, just click register app. And what this will do now is it will generate for us a package. So these instructions, as you see, npm install Firebase, we've already done it. We have yarn installed Firebase into our application. What we really want though is this Firebase config. So I want you to copy this over. And even if you look this line, copy this over too because we're going to do it because we already imported the initialize app. So here, when you paste this in, you end up passing this to the initialize app function that we get from Firebase app. What this config does is it identifies this SDK, which is essentially a developer kit that we're using, so the library itself. This library is just some JavaScript library that abstracts away some of the functionality that we need to use in order to interact with our instance of Firebase. So those CRUD actions I was telling you about, creating, reading, updating, destroying, authenticating, all of those things is going to happen using this Firebase app instance. So here I'm going to make this more clear by saying I'm calling this Firebase app. So initialize app takes the config. It's like, oh, this config tells me this is the specific Crown Clothing DB instance, which is the Firebase instance that we made a few videos ago. Literally, this instance that we're looking at right here in the console right here. This is the instance. This unique identifier, as I mentioned before, we see it actually right here, this project ID. Now, if you're wondering, typically speaking with API keys, aren't we never supposed to expose our API keys? Well, in Firebase, unfortunately or fortunately, this is not the same pattern. Firebase needs this API key, and this is not some super secret API key that you got to worry about. This is actually also explicitly stated inside of their documentation, so don't worry about this, but you need your own config. Your own config is going to be able to allow you to make Firebase actions, CRUD actions, to save, read, update, all those things to your own specific instance of Firebase. So now that we have Firebase set up, the next thing we need to do is we need to actually set up the authentication. Now, as I mentioned, Firebase kind of includes a bunch of different library packages for us when we installed Firebase. It wasn't just one library. It was a bunch of little micro libraries. One of them is anything related to authentication, and this is under Firebase/auth. So this is pretty much the auth service. And what we need from here is we need get auth, because just like initialize app, we got to create a auth instance as well. We also need sign in with redirect. Now, there's actually a couple. So there's sign in with redirect and there's sign in with pop-up. Let's take both because I want to talk about both. The other thing we need is also Google Auth Provider. So these are all namespace specifically from Firebase Auth. It's using these that we're able to create our Google sign-in. We can either sign in using a pop-up or we can sign in by allowing our application to redirect. And we'll walk through both. This is just very specific setup for Firebase. You can find all of this, again, inside of the docs that I'll link. So in order to use this Google authentication, we need to first initialize a provider using this Google Auth Provider class that we received. So here you want to call new Google Auth Provider, which in turn will give you back this provider instance. Then what we want to do is we want to call set custom parameters. So these custom parameters will take some kind of configuration object, and with it, we can tell different ways that we want this Google Auth Provider to behave. So generally speaking, the main one that we want is really just prompt, which will be select_account. So what this means is that every time somebody interacts with our provider, we want to always force them to select an account. I'll talk more about it once we've set it up and what this detail does. So really these set custom parameters are primarily for Google authentication providers, which is specific to Google's own interface. Again, this is just some particular configuration that Google wants. Really, this whole file that we're setting up is just unique to the different types of configuration styles that Google in particular wants from us. So there's not a lot of logic flow here to really learn at a high level. You really just got to learn what they want for their tooling. And that tooling might change a little bit here and there. And honestly, that's really all there is to it. The other thing we need to do is we need to export our authentication, which as I mentioned, we need to create the instance. And then we also need to export out now this sign in with pop-up. So here I want to call it sign in with Google pop-up. And this is going to be equal to an anonymous function that's going to return, so remember, no squiggly brackets, we want to return sign in with pop-up. And what we want to pass to this is auth and the provider. So the provider instance that we created, as well as the auth instance that we generated, we want to pass both of these into sign in with pop-up. Now here you might be wondering, why is auth just a function invocation without the new keyword, whereas Google Auth Provider is one? So Google Auth Provider is essentially a class that we get from Firebase Authentication, and this is connected to Google Auth itself. Google Auth has many different implementations. This is just Firebase Authentication's own. So this is a class. And sometimes you want to generate multiple of these different providers because you might have different provider instances doing different things. For example, as we see with sign in with pop-up provider, you pass it a provider. Maybe for sign in with redirect, you pass it a different provider. These providers are kind of just instructions for this instance of provider, but you can have multiple different providers. Authentication, on the other hand, there's a singleton of, meaning that the way your application authenticates and the rules for authentication and the authentication that communicates with Firebase, this should always be the same one for every application. Why would you have different authentication services for one application? That doesn't make sense, right? once you authenticate for this website as a whole, it should be held onto for the duration of the lifecycle of this application. You would not ever really need more than one authentication, whereas you might need multiple providers because you might have different buttons that trigger different forms of even Google sign-in with pop-up. Maybe some of them prompt you to select an account, some of them don't. You can imagine that there are different cases and use cases for these two. But essentially, now that we have this set up, what we want to do now is we want to leverage this. So in order for us to actually use this, what we need to do is we need to go back to our application and we need to go to Google Console. Now what you want to do is you want to go to this Authentication tab on the left here. And then in the top here, you want to go to Sign In Method. What we want to do is we want to click the Google because we want to provide the ability to now sign in with Google. We don't need to worry about any of these other settings for now. We'll talk about this domain one when it becomes important. For now, all you need to know is that localhost is authorized by default, meaning that this is a list of whatever domains that we allow our application to use Google Sign-In. Now, we're currently testing on localhost, so this is by default enabled. That's all we need. We don't need to touch that. Up here, though, we need to enable this sign-in. And then for the project support email, just choose the email that you want to be the one that forwards all the support emails for in terms of this authentication in this list. So here, this is my account. And then you just hit save. And that's all it takes. Now you should be able to access. It's enabled. So let's go back to our application. We've set up this file, so now we actually need to use it. So let's go into our sign-in component. What we're going to do is we're going to import in from our Firebase utils. So go to your utils folder, Firebase utils, and we want to bring in our sign in with Google pop-up method. What we're going to do is we are just going to create a log Google user, which is an asynchronous function. Because remember, whenever you make a call to some database, this is going to be asynchronous. So we want to get the value here by awaiting calling our sign in with Google pop-up. And then we just want to console.log the response. And then down here, we're going to make a button. And inside this button, it's going to say sign in with Google pop-up. And then we're going to set the onClick method so that it uses our log Google user method. So if we save this, and now we go back to our application, what we're going to do is we are now going to click this sign in with Google pop-up method. When we click this, notice that it opens up the Google pop-up prompt. I click the email that I've got here, and now we see we get back our user credential. And inside of these objects, what you'll see is that under the properties, you got the access token. Remember earlier in the previous lesson when I showed you the diagram of how our application communicates with Firebase, which communicates to Google, and finally the whole purpose is to get this access token using which we can then create CRUD requests. This is that access token. So just now, after we prompted the sign-in, it went through that flow that I justified to you. And finally, Firebase is giving us back the access token. So now we're able to make our CRUD requests. This is a lot of setup that we had to do for Firebase, both inside of our Firebase instance, but then also inside our Firebase utils file. I know we jumped around and we spent a really long time doing this video. This video is a really long lesson, but honestly, it's just to get through a lot of this setup. And there's a lot of different configurations and different things we have to learn about this. So thank you for sticking with me for this one. But now we essentially have our sign-in method pretty much set up. So in the next video, we're going to learn about how we can leverage this in order to actually start building in authentication. And we're also going to continue with Firebase. So join me in the next lesson where we'll move on from understanding what to do now with this authenticated user.